Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Lore You Know, Scarlands. Today's episode is entitled Vesh because we're going to be talking about the country of Vesh. But before we do so, of course, I have to talk about coffee. Head over to Found Familiar Coffee using the link in chat. Use the code WHPubs to get 10% off, and then drink coffee with us on the show. Yay!
Don't tell them I drink tea.
Tea is also a viable replacement for coffee, one I should drink more often, but...
And if you want your D&D characters to drink coffee, go pick up Yenny's journal where I introduced the spell, create coffee.
Nice. I like it. Too late to drink coffee here. I want to sleep tonight. That sounds like whining, sir.
He's in France.
That's not
like
a valid excuse.
So
okay.
That's like,
okay, that's valid.
Right, 8 or 9 hours ahead of me, which I'm in the Pacific time zone in the U.S. So
right.
That's like I don't remember if it's 8 or 9 hours. I think it might be 9.
I think he's 8 hours ahead of me, so it'd be 9 hours ahead of you.
Yeah. So
yep.
Noon. 8 p.m. That's a bit late to be drinking coffee.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
There were days where I could do it when I used to be like I drink like so much soda and energy drinks and all that. I could like drink 3 Red Bulls and go to sleep and be just fine. But now it's like I have like a cup or 2 of coffee a day and I cut out everything else, and so now would keep me awake.
I live in Seattle, so I'm in Starbucks.
Right.
Which the funniest thing about Seattle is no one in Seattle actually drinks Starbucks. Except for the people like work there, and we all drink like there's a billion coffee places in Seattle, and Starbucks it's the home of Starbucks. But it was and there's a Starbucks on every corner. Don't get me wrong, it's everywhere. But like Starbucks is like, I guess I can't get to the good place, so I guess it's like that.
Right.
And there's literally an intersection in the city where there's on 3 of the 4 corners there's a Starbucks. Or there used to be. I don't know if they survived COVID. I don't know. Like some of them shut down COVID. But pre-COVID, there was a place like that in Seattle.
That's funny.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, that's my anecdote of the city of which I live.
So today we're going to talk about Vesh, which is a country on the continent there of Ghelspad.
Have we gone like 30 episodes without talking about Vesh?
Right. Well, see, that's the thing about Vesh. It's one of those places I feel like it should have had its own book because it is such an important place to the world, and yet it didn't have its own book. But what they did is they worked Vesh into almost every entry of every other nation and city because they're allied or enemies of almost everyone. Like
everybody.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they, they're the northern neighbors to the Calastian hegemony, which is not they bump heads. They are not friends. Yeah. And so everything Calastian is talking about Vesh, and Vesh are such assholes, and everyone else is like, we like Vesh. Kind of, for the most part.
And it doesn't help that their whole vigilant thing gets in the nose of everybody. And on the flip side, vigilants make great PCs.
I have to read a quote. Sorry, I have to read a quote for later when people are listening to this on the podcast instead. Vesh is the America of Ghelspad. Everything is relative to us. Exactly. Exactly. I feel like that is how it was written.
I think of Vesh as France. I mean, when I think of culture, I equate Shelzar more to America, and I think of Vesh as more France. But because I think of Lydian as Latin. And that the Lydian language is root-based in Latin, and Calastia feels like Italy to me. Vesh feels like France in terms of the languages offshooting Lydian. And then Shelzar is rooted in the Elzen languages, and that feels to me more Germanic, and that would be why Shelzari is more like English in my brain of nonsense. Gotcha. And this is just my linguistic headcanon of gibberish. I gotta admit that. And then Albania is obviously Nordic, and then you get into the other countries outside of Europe, languages in the rest of on the other continents. But because of literally my brain canon gibberish.
another comment from the chat is The hot take: Veshans are racist monsters, which we will get to because in older editions, it was still the case, but it wasn't as forefront to being a player character as it is now when you can play
A monster.
a monster, essentially. Like, they're not monsters, but like, the monstrous races is what they were called in 5th edition. Sorry, 3rd edition, they were monstrous humanoids. And now they're just humanoids, and the whole, like, viewpoint of them is there's the redeemed, as we talked about in previous episodes, and Vesh doesn't necessarily get that. But we'll get into that.
Yeah. We need to talk about it. Okay, Vesh.
The history of Vesh.
History of Vesh, as we start with all of these wacky countries. They were part of the Ladian Empire, which we talked about before. Go figure. And just about everywhere was part of the Ladian Empire. And they were specifically the Vash province.
Yeah, Vash.
Vash province of the Ladian Empire. The Ladian Empire, as in its collapse, it basically abandoned the outlying provinces because they were too busy just trying to keep their shit together from invading the Albanians and whatnot. And so it's pretty much abandoned by, and this is again why I equate Lead to Rome, because it's like, Vesh could have been France or England or something. But if you were to equate that history. So, and it was interesting specifically in this history of the Vash province is that same year that the Leading Empire's troops basically pulled out and were like, we have to go home and do all this business, a meteor storm illuminated the sky, which I think is fascinating because of the nature of stars on Scarn.
Yeah.
And how does that work? And so it's kind of an interesting, funky, and of course meteor storms are always an omen, good or ill, because it's, it is.
I was gonna say, it kind of has to be, because like something has to be up there doing something, right? Because it's not. Yeah. For those of you who haven't caught a previous episode to know what we're talking about, like the stars aren't really stars in the way that we view them in science and all that in reality, and the area beyond the planet is not the same as other. It's not necessarily described.
Yeah, because the constellations are demiplanes.
Right.
So the stars are probably not suns.
Right.
They're maybe just lights in the sky. We don't know. But the idea of there being extra celestial bodies, what is a meteor? Could that have been like something happened on one of the moons? And
what kind of space garbage is out there to fall?
And
really the answer is kind of nothing, unless the gods or titans did something at some point. And so a meteor storm would be an omen of some kind, because I think it was deliberate, because the idea of a meteor storm not being deliberate on Scarn is weird. So there's that. And they said that during that little time, that era, there was a bunch of upheavals throughout the region. And they called it the government that took over the area that is now Vesh at the time. They called it the upheavals, the era of 100 republics. And it wasn't that there was actually 100 republics here. They don't say that there was, but throughout this kind of several hundred years era, everybody keeps trying to start republics in these various little subsections of what is now Vesh. And so it's like little, just slightly bigger than a city-state. This 50 square miles is this, the Republic of Bob. And like everybody kept trying to apparently create democracy. Mostly failed to create democracy. And mostly just created kingdoms. So you ended up with these little pockets. And eventually it was like about a dozen-ish kingdoms in this region. And you'd think it's not that big of a region. I don't know if you get the map up. Yeah, it's not that big of a region, compared to like the hegemony. It's not even, Vesh is about the size of one of the countries in the hegemony, so it's not that big. In any case, King Ardenus of Arsenoth, and Arsenoth is sort of the central province, really, in many ways, in Vesh. He declared himself the first among equals of the various people who called themselves monarchs or
leaders of these little republics throughout. Republic means democracy. I don't know, because they're kings. Someone define republic for me. But we'll do that in the chat. So anyway, he declared himself like, I am the High King, basically, and everybody else was like, yeah, well, we don't. Well, no, but we don't really have the power to say that you're not. So, whatever. That was sort of the reaction. And then the Chardunis showed up, and so this was like several hundred years after. Well, actually, I think 1,000 years after the Leading Empire fell. The Chardunis show up and they start conquering all of Ghelspad. They get as far as the Keldar Mountains and attempt to break their way into the Vesh province, and they basically unite these little kingdoms and whatnot. Unite, build a defensive force, and say no, you're not coming in. and the Chaldean Empire never makes it up into that north east corner of Ghelspad as a huge result of, well, A, the terrain, but B, this United Kingdom's front that they set up. In addition, the Marquis of Beltane being yet another one of those little kingdoms, formed an elite unit of scouts, rangers, and wilderness fighters. And in 3338 OC, which is, we're now approaching the time of the Divine War at this point, he created this unit to fight monsters, and at the time, this was orcs and ravaging beasts that would, just harm the area, particularly out of the Plains of Lead. And this is the point where Blood Basin doesn't exist yet, because that was I think there was a small lake there, but there wasn't this huge lake.
Right.
So there wasn't like this safe border, and
right.
The border between the Plains of Lead, or the eastern Plains of Lead, and Vesh didn't have this huge blocking thing to get between the two regions. So it was really easy for rampaging hordes of whoever, Proud or Orcs or Vengarak or whatever, to come in and make things hard. So they created this group to guard the border called the Deltanian Vigil, and that was like the first. They were the first of the vigilants, and all of the other vigils that are formed over the course of the next several hundred years are based on the model that they created at that point. Then the Divine War happened, and this is pretty much where things go to shit for Vesh. Because a lot of just awful stuff happens in that region during the Divine War. And it just was bad, in addition to multiple battles, rampaging, the biggest battle being in terms of direct conflict between the Titans and the gods, because there's tons of little battles that happen during the war of Titan spawn or Titan followers and divine followers, like across nearly the whole planet. But the big battles were, of course, between the gods and the Titans themselves, and one of those battles takes place here, which is the battle with Cadem. And in that fight, this isn't like the gods can presumably change size, because if Madriel can show up to a wedding, presumably she's not 1,000 feet tall, she's person size. And so this battle, the gods are like colossally huge, because most of the Titans can't change size like that.
Right.
Sure,
and the Mithril Golem was there, which is...
And yes, the Mithril Golem's already
ginormous,
feet tall, and it was short compared to everyone else in this battle.
Right. Short but stocky.
Cadem is like Godzilla but bigger. And this was the battle with Cadem, and in that fight, Chardoon literally picks up a giant they called it a boulder in one of the myths, but really a boulder, I think, is not. It's more like he grabbed a mountain.
Right. Boulder for him.
Yeah, I guess.
Mountain for others.
Well, it wasn't even like a mountain, it was mountain sized, but he took basically bedrock from underneath the Keldar steps and just scooped it up and then chained Cadem to it with these, massive magical chains, and then Vangel hucked him into the ocean. after Belsmith ripped his heart out. So and the entire time
as
the
one
golem's
does
holding
when
his
they're a
tail.
god, right?
As one does when they're a god, yeah. Oh, the sea has turned to blood. Oh well,
Right?
that happened. So in the process of this, Chardoon goes to do this, and he creates this basically massive depression where there was bedrock once, and now there's just a hole, and the water fills it eventually and creates a basin, which becomes the northern border of Vesh, basically. And how many of the nations, the previous little kingdoms, were taken out as a result of that. But the other thing that happened that was massively bad was there was also a forest in the Keldar Steppes area that was completely destroyed, and I'll talk about that more when we talk about the Keldar Steppes. But that also really hit the area really badly because it was this massive, beautiful, ancient forest that provided a bunch of resources, and it was just completely devastated as the majority of the Titans, for various personal reasons that are not really described, went in and individually wrecked it. like one of them just like, I'm just gonna pull out trees for shits and giggles, and another one's like, I'm gonna burn it down. And like, why did all the Titans wreck it? Well, again, we'll talk about that in a different, when we talk about the Blood Steppes, or the Keldar Steppes in a different episode. So, Vesh had been pooed upon very much during the war. Is the upshot. And took a longer time to recover, unlike the Calast province, and because it was so devastating to the region. And it wasn't until 56 AV that, as a nation, Vesh finally kind of got its stealth back together again. So a good 50 years after the end of the war, they reforged the alliance of all of their little things under one umbrella, and actually really did declare a democracy this time, and had an election and elected a leader, and it was no longer a monarchy. And their first big influential thing in terms of Ghelspad politics was the Convention of Eritrea in shortly after that. And then they go and aided in the Druid War, and everybody's like, wow, these guys are actually a presence now. They've really, it was like, a bunch of random provinces from Lead, and then just a bunch of bickering kingdoms, and now they're actually a unified front. And so, big deal. A couple of other notable things that happened between the founding of Vesh and modern day, IV 150. There was still a sense of nobility for a very long time because there had been all these little kingdoms, and one of the vigils was actually led or had a Bregis kingdom, Bregis, Bregis, fought in the Battle of Twisted Timbers towards southern Vesh, where you find a lake formerly known as Mountain Tier Loch, was renamed to Adran's Tier. Adran is the noble, leading a band of Veshians fought against the Calastians. And it was a big deal, such a big deal that they named the lake after him. I can get into that more if we talk about Tier. I think we're going to have to talk about the regions around Vesh in a later episode because there's a lot here to cover. And then in AV 100, Slytherin, i.e. the rat folk, from the Morning Marshes, who at this point, as a species, was only 100 years old, or a little over 100 years old, began raiding southern Vesh. And Vesh lost a battle against them called the Battle of Two Rivers, which is presumably two of the rivers in the marshes, because that's where there's a lot of rivers converge. And it was bad. I mean, they get trounced. And there were later battles against them in a couple of other towns or cities in Veshan province, in Veshan country, outside of the marshes. So the Slytherin were known to invade Vesh itself, beyond the Morning Marshes. Thus, the constant skirmishes and really war between the Slytherin of the Marshes and Vesh. And why Vesh has this sense of them being racist. So they have a democracy. Every 5 years they have an election. The The leader is called the Home Commander, and he's but he's a military leader. So in addition to being a civic leader, he's also the head of the Vigil, the Vigils and the army. The Veshan Vigil and the Vesh army are separate. They work together, but there's a standing army of, I'm scrolling down my notes. There's a standing army of about 5, 8, 9, 30, 50, I want to say 50,000 fighters, roughly. I'm happy to do the math. Don't know why I did. Yeah, 50,000 fighters, infantry, cavalry, combat clerics, combat wizards, who basically defend the borders. And then there's the vigilance, of which there's only a few thousand compared to the 50,000. And the sizes of the vigils vary. It's in AV 150. It's like a couple, like 10,000 maybe. And they don't defend the borders from invasion. For the most part, they go beyond the borders and check the outlands, like make sure it's safe. And we'll talk about the Vesh the vigilance in a bit today, hopefully. So, where was I? Why did I start talking about that? Yeah, so the Home Commander leads up all of that. He leads up the military and the defense of Vesh, and that's really his job mostly, is to defend the country. But he also leads the civic stuff. Elected every 5 years. These normally comes from normally the nominations come from retired vigilants, because they kind of know all the things. And vigilants are trained in diplomacy. In addition to being trained in battle and woodsman craft and all that, they're also trained in history and diplomacy, like going beyond special forces and to just as also diplomats, also representing the nation of Vesh to the outside world, because you're more likely to encounter a vigilant outside of Vesh than you are inside of Vesh, and thus Vesh's reputation of getting their fingers in everybody's country, because they're spread all over the place, and you can find vigilants everywhere. To me, this is just playing a PC vigilant opens doors as a PC, because you can be like, why are you in Fang's Fall? Well, I'm here representing the Veshan Vigil for blah 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 blah, because they're want to know about X and Y, and anything short of a dungeon crawl adventure in Scarn, having a vigilant in the party or being a party of vigilants is cool. Why would you, if you're playing a ranger, why wouldn't you be a vigilant? Other than the prestige class maybe not appealing to you. So I adore that about it. Anyway, going on to the craziness of Vesh. Any thoughts, Jeremy, before I move on to a kind of different section? I know I'm always random with this.
I think you're good.
Okay, so Vesh is made up of a whole bunch of provinces, which presumably were the former kingdoms or mini republics or whatever you want to call them throughout the region. This confused the poo out of me because I wasn't exactly sure where these provinces were. Some of them are defined, some of them are not. I built a really random map based on the best of. I did this like yesterday. So guessing where they would be. The ones in purple are the ones that I felt pretty solid about where they were. And then the ones in blue are the northern provinces, and the ones in red are the southern provinces. So going like around Aethys, A-E-T-H-I, you can see it on the screen, was described specifically as the northwest
Great.
corner. And the borders of Ashe too. In the old lore, the southern border and the border like right around Denev's Aquifer, i.e. Ardwin's Tier. Both names, that's annoying. Again, I'll explain that later when I get to Denev's Aquifer. But those borders are defined in the old books, but the northern and the northwest border along the Keldars and the northern border are not defined in the old books. But in the SLPG for Pathfinder 5th edition is defined as going up to the Horn. They cut it at the Hornsworth. So the Hornsworth River starts in the Keldar Mountains, cuts across to Blood Basin, and then picks up again on the other side of Blood Basin, flowing in kind of a sneaky pattern into the Blood Sea by the Morning Marshes. So it creates that northern and, along with Blood Basin, the northern and eastern border of Vesh. That said, there's area, and why I included it in the map, there's areas beyond the Hornsworth River into that peninsula over by north of Lake Repose and Sheer Falls that is considered under the Veshin Protectorate. It not necessarily a specific province, although it wouldn't surprise me if one of these provinces is supposed to be there. But it's more independent, and there's like some communities of elves and orcs and whatnot living there. But not part of the Veshin, like sort of like Guam or Puerto Rico, for the United States. It's like part of Vesh, but they don't get to vote, I guess. I don't know. Should be its own province. So okay, so the border's fuzzy. But we've based the border on what was in the new lore. So anyway, as I was saying, Aethys, Northwest End. There's tigers there. I don't know why, but there's tigers there, which is cool. I love it.
So when I read this part, it was interesting because they're like small tigers. So I feel like it's one of those things, because the Plains of Lead is just to the north, and like you know that area at one point might have been a tiger-friendly area. It's almost like these tigers are like a subspecies that went off into the mountains and over. I mean, when you get into evolution in fantasy worlds, was it like an offshoot of normal tigers that went up in the mountains and grew smaller over time because of evolution? Or did like one of the gods or titans just be like, these are cute, let's make smaller versions? They're like the chibi tigers.
We're gonna put cougar-sized tigers in these hills. So there's tigers there. And the people who live there have lots of ties to Albadia. So I think in terms of like the migration of people from Albadia and Amalthea into that region, maps, because, and again, this is one of the few that specifically states the location. Lots of dwarves live there as well. So the Veshians, what amazes me about the Veshians is ethnically, as the human population of Vesh, are incredibly diverse. Like, and part of it is like, so what, skin tone do you want your character to be? Well, if you're from Vesh, it can be anything. So, because they describe various, like, okay, the Veshians who live in this area are Albadian, i.e. pale and blonde. There's other ones that are darker skinned. There's other ones, so you can be like, I want to be brown, or I want to be black, or I want to be white, or I want to be purple. Purple. Purple is obviously with the horns. But anyway, what they're called. But anyway, that's where you'd find you could be pretty much anything and call yourself from Vesh, because it's this ethnic melting pot, i.e. going back to that theory that Vesh is like the United States. Hi, I'm from the United States. I'm sorry if I'm US centric. I haven't been anywhere. Anyway, moving on. We had Bragus. I put it south of Aethys because they seem to have a lot of overlap. There's a lot of things described as they have the same taste in food, and they have the same taste in music. So I was like, they're probably bordering each other. The book doesn't specify that they're bordering each other, but I'm like, it kind of maps. So still in the quote north, but although Bragus, the people are also described as looking almost Calastian, and that which is darker tone, browner skin, black hair, green eyes. And of course, if you compare anybody from Bragus or anybody in Vesh at all to looking Calastian, they'd get really pissed at you because they're like, no, they're our enemies. I am not Calastian. There's no connection whatsoever. And Belton, which I did split a little bit there. I didn't know. Belton province, I had a hard time placing, because one section that lists the province Belton isn't even listed, but then it's referenced a bunch in later sections in the same not even just in the same book, in the same entry in the same book. So I was like, I think this is also a province, even though it's not in the list. Maybe it's in the middle, so it's not in the north or the south. I put it where I did because of the Beltane Vigil, which is also kind of in that area, so I don't know where it should go, and I just stuck the word on there to be like, there's a province. But anyway, their people also look similar in tone to the people from Bregas, and food like Aethys, so it's like these three provinces should be near each other, and I probably should have put it closer to the other two, but so I don't know where that one goes. I kind of guessed wildly. And we're gonna get into more complicated things in a minute. And then we have Adavani, which there really wasn't anything specific about it other than it's one of the northern provinces. And Delane, lots of dwarves in Delane. But the dwarves have adopted human cultural traits, so dwarves live there but around humans and do human things.
Which, if you pick up the Ghelspad, Yugman's Guide to Ghelspad, there are rules in there on how to do that.
Yeah, you could be a dwarf with human heritage. So
right?
It's like, I'm like a dwarf, I'm short like a dwarf, but I can, I use a bow or whatever. I do human weapons, and I have more human culture, and I get the human stat bonus or whatever it is. I love the heritage rules.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So then the southern provinces, the south overlaps with the blood. Not the blood. I was going to say blood steppes. The Keldar steppes, way nicer than the blood steppes. The north overlaps with the Keldar steppes. More borders the blood basin. The challenge there in the north, though, is also in the Ghelspad book, at least, as opposed to the new lore. And the Ghelspad book is described as where various orc tribes war. There's a location in there called the something peak rock, something rock, scorched rock. It's called scorched rock on the map. That changes names depending on which orc tribe controls it. And there's 3 major orc tribes in that region: the Gravelfist, the Scorched Skull, and the Thornhide. How did I do? This is from memory. I'm not referencing my notes right now. They war over this little rock. So the idea that this rock is in the middle of a Veshian province seems weird to me, because wouldn't the Vigil be like, fuck off, stop warring where our people are? Right. So I was like, this is in Vesh? This rock is in Vesh? Not like off the northern border of Vesh? So I get confused, but I don't know. So how much the north is in the steppes, I don't know. The south, though, is in the fertile area. The farmlands are all in the south, and it's kind of where the more, let's say, politically influential provinces are. The less rural provinces, the more urban areas, and more the cities are more in the either between the north and south or in the south. Kind of continue around the circle. As I mentioned, Beltane. There's also Arsarnoth, which has a clear location. I'm looking at the map, but it's so tiny I can't read it. Arsarnoth has a clear location. Right, it's where Lave is. So I was like, I guess I'll just stick the word next to the word Lave on the map. Lave is the capital of Vesh. And is on most of the maps that show cities. So that's pretty defined. Then there's Garasso, which is supposed to be on the is on the Hornsworth River. So that's why I stuck it where I stuck it, because I was like, well, it's a southern province, and it's on the river, and it's not Arsarnoth, so I guess it's north of Arsarnoth. I said, shrugging. And that just left Dan Bajor I put there because, again, there's a Vigil. The Bajor and Vigil kind of arbitrarily plucked it there. And then that left Pelin and Liaris. The lore states that Pelin and Liaris border each other, So I don't know which one is in the west and which one's in the east, but I just stuck them next to each other. Maybe they're north and south. I don't have no idea, but I arbitrarily stuck them there. like, so anyway, you've got these provinces. There's some description in the book of like what people wear in these various provinces that I love it because it pretty much every medieval style of clothing is represented. like in and every kind of food is represented. It's really wild. So in the northern provinces they wore more fur and leather. In Garasso they wear doublets and drag sleeve dresses, a la, very very medieval, and bodices and whatnot. In another one they wear robes like almost Grecian long robes in which province it is. But in one of the other provinces, I think in Pelin or Liaris. So it's just wild that you can, and another one it's tunics, tights, and sandals. So it's like pick your favorite style of any time during the European Dark Ages, and you've got you can find it in Vesh. So I absolutely adore that about Vesh. It's like it's just so generic. It's like, here's our generic fantasy universe. What medieval thing do you want to be? It's all here in this one country, and I think that was really just to let people play anything. Why they defined it that way, and then some game designer got very very specific and said they wear doublets in this province. Sure, but kind of fun. And they invented several musical instruments that are specifically Veshan, some specific food that's just kind of fun and cool, and holidays. They talk about and we drew, and I okay, now I'm gonna mention this. Obviously, Vigilant a lot of it takes place in Vesh. I drew from this lore extensively writing the book. This episode, I'm now warning you, if you haven't read Vigilant yet, I'm about to spoil a bunch of shit in the book. As I get into more of this lore. So, my apologies. I'm not apologizing. Sorry, not sorry. If you haven't read the book yet, it's been out for years now. Go freaking pick it up. And read it. And I'm about to spoil a bunch of stuff. Insequential stuff. Not really. But anyway. So food is diverse, clothing is diverse, religion is not very diverse. They mostly worship the good gods. I don't know why I put that in air quotes. They're not really air quotes. Madriel and Tanel are huge in Vesh. Thus, the holidays are really wrapped around them. They talked about the Carnival of Flowers here and how they have contests. And the Festival of the Sun, they have contests. Festival of the Wheat, they have contests. They talk about there's 5 big holidays mentioned in the Ghelspad books. Those 3 I just mentioned, plus Grim Day, which fall on the equinoxes and solstices, and then Divinity's Day, which is kind of during the summertime when they revere all of the gods. So those 5 holidays are the only ones described explicitly in the Ghelspad books. So they're all celebrated in Vesh, and they're really the only ones described as being celebrated in Vesh. You get to the Calastian books, it's got its own holidays. Holofaust has some of its own holidays. Various regions have their own holidays. I know all this because we did a calendar of trying to cram in all these holidays into it. Vesh is just the 5 mentioned. But again, as we said before, all of these books are so Vesh-centric that even though it describes these other regions, a lot of this lore is written from the perspective of some lore master. So there'll be all these of these books generally have some kind of wrapper, typically in the first or second chapter, particularly the lore chapters, where it'll be based on a report from so and so or such and such. So many of these are based on a report from a Vigilant.
I mean, to be fair, the Vigilants are we're going everywhere. So
yeah.
Other than wandering minstrels and sages and adventurers, they're really the people who are going out and seeing this stuff. So
most of these lore books are going to be either from the perspective of Yugman the Sage. Sometimes from one of the guys in Calastia. There's a couple of these books that it's a couple of the lore wrappers are just like, I am reporting to Emperor Verdok about the things that happened over there. And or a vigilant. Vigilant so and so found this thing, vigilant so and so. And so a lot of it is it's a vigilant. So there you go. Oh. So you see that kind of wrapper around that. Anyway, that was a non sequitur. I was talking about holidays, right? And religion. So Madriel Tanel, they also worship Hadrada and Keeley, Corian, and Denев. Are like the secondary gods, so it's like those two, and then these three, and Denев. And then there's the three evil gods are respected because nobody wants to be lightning bolted, but they're not worshipped, and their worship of them is discouraged. So if you go into like an all gods temple, there'd be a big shrine to Madriel, a big shrine to Tanel, and a moderately big shrine to Corian, and blah 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 blah. And then there'll be this little corner with like a basin with like a sacrificed goat and like a little tiny statues to Belsmith and Vangal and Chardoon. Like, we respect them. We give them a goat every day, and that's it, or whatever it is. But like, we don't worship them. We don't pray to them. We don't ask them for anything because that would be bad. We just say, yes, we still respect you. Please don't lightning bolt us. And that's like it. So if you're a follower of Belsmith in Vesh, you're probably doing that on the down low. Not that they don't exist, but you're not gonna be public about it. Yeah, okay. That's the religion. Kind of glossed over a whole bunch of stuff. Talk about climate. I don't know if there's much more to talk about climate. Again, the south is more rural in terms of, I say rural, more farmland, but has the cities, so it's like both rural and urban. The north is more mountainous, more dispersed.
Yeah.
Fewer cities.
I think it is interesting because it does talk about how like there are warm areas and there are cold areas,
Yeah.
and it's like one of the only nations that has that separation where it's like, because most of them are like, this is a pretty, like Albania, they have summers, but it's really just like it's 30 degrees out instead of -20,
Yeah.
And but like because of the way that Vesh sits and has the mountains there, it's a lot like, so I live in Colorado. I view it a lot like Colorado because you have these like flat plains that are out. They're considered oh crap, I can't think of the word right now, but they're considered like desert plains. But we don't really have, like, we do have an area that actually has sand, that are like, I don't even know how to describe things. These dunes. When somebody says dunes to me, you think the Sahara or whatever, and people have to like walk up them. But like there are still like these rolling. Our dunes are like hundreds of feet tall. It's mind blowing to see. They're like hills.
Colorado. I've never been to Colorado.
Yeah.
So I don't know from Colorado.
But then we have like mountains that are some of the tallest mountains in this area, and they're almost always snow capped and cold. So I think of Vesh.
Here I am thinking Washington State, because we have similar massive terrain differences. Because we have the valleys like where I live, where we get very temperate weather, and it never gets super cold. Except for maybe 2-3 weeks a year, you get snow, and then you've got snowy mountains. So, and apple trees growing all year round, or almost all year round. But I actually don't think of the climate as like Washington State. I think we're further north. Vesh, one of the things that is described as growing there is grapes, and that Veshan wine is a thing and a big deal. And it made me think, that must make me think of France, because like France is known for freaking grapes. Vesh is known for grapes. That's what made me think of France. I haven't been to France either, so I don't know the climate. I mean, I know it from like reading about it or seeing it on things, but not living there. So the climate seems to be really diverse. You're right, and it's very far north, but I think a lot of that is also the proximity to the Blood Sea, because the whole east coast of Ghelspad is warmer than it ought to be, because the Blood Sea is warmer ocean than an ocean usually is, because Cadem, bleeding in it. So there you go there. Anyway, capital city of Vesh is Lave. Clearly on the map there. In the Arsenoth Delta province. Was once the capital of the Kemini province, called Lavius, which makes me totally think of Latin again. And then later was the capital of the Kingdom of Arsenoth. Arsenoth is an interesting one because it has a vanishing R. Some of the lore it's spelled Arcernoth. Some of the lore it's spelled Acernoth. So Arsenoth or Acernoth, like that
Astronaut or
R
Acernoth,
after
right?
the A. Yeah, or Acernoth. That R tends to vanish sometimes within the same book.
Yeah. You got to wonder if it was like a typo or if somebody like went to a meeting and wrote it down wrong and then they just never caught it afterwards.
Yeah. I believe we went with Arsenoth and Vigilant. So the kids drove me nuts because I was like, pick a spelling. Slytherin was the other one. Slytherin. Oh my god, we spelled it
Yeah.
with an E. And they were like, no, it's with an I, and we had to like do a search and replace. And the word Slytherin is in Vigilant like 2,000 times. I'm not exaggerating.
Can you imagine the
Hey.
days before find replace where you had to go and oh man.
Been brutal. It would have been brutal.
There are times I really want to have a typewriter just so I can sit down and not have the distraction of a computer because there's all these other things on your computer. You sit down a typewriter and just be like, this is my only thing. And then I'm like, I don't want to have to proofread this shit.
Oh, it'd be horrible. I'd rather handwrite, honestly.
Right?
Yeah. So, Lave, capital of Vesh. This is where the home command, the hall of command is. It's described in gross detail in the Serpent and the Fold module. We literally ripped off that map and described about 4 rooms of it in Vigilant in like chapter 1, or chapter 1 and 2, as we, and I adore it. My players mock me because there's this one room in the Hall of Home Command. The Hall of Command, it's just basically a conference room where the Home Commander, it's this huge table, and it's just kind of on the first floor in the eastern side of the building. This massive conference table, all these chairs and everything to hold like a good dozen people. And it's this window, the building is described as having this mica stuff in the window that reflects sunlight beautifully, and it's like Madriel is shining upon you. And and I would read the paragraph right out of every single time my players would go here and talk to the home commander for whatever reason, because I had several vigilant PCs and they were always coming here, and I would always be like, and now I will read you the paragraph out of Serpent and Fold of this room. Like, Sarah has to read the paragraph out of the Serpent and Fold.
Did they ever get to the point where they could like just like mimic it back to you because they knew it by heart? Excellent.
Yes, 2 of my players could just mimic it back. Not all of my players, but at least 2 of my players could in fact do that.
That's funny.
Fran and Cassie can both do that. Just tell me that it's like, and a description of the sunroom, blah 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 blah. Which I absolutely love.
Love it.
Stern is home commander in AB 150. I adore him as a character. It's like the home commander, and he shows up in Vigilant, of course, nonsensically, because why would you send this recruit Vigil to go see the president? Because he's from another country, and you don't just let somebody from the enemies of Calastia to join your elite fighters. And his grandfather was but anyway, I saw the home commander, other than the fact that I wanted to describe the sunroom in Vigilant. I'm not that lame. So there's that. You can I love that whole building. It's got toilets too. which established to me that they have indoor plumbing in Vesh. Slightly less medieval feeling, the fact that there's indoor plumbing and a sewer system in Lave. I don't know. This makes me excited. But there's little water closets in there. All right, and other cool things in Lave. There's this other place called the Grand Square, which is this large open space with like little areas where used to be where nobles would hang out and talk, like whatever. I always picture this sort of a Grecian place with where philosophers would chat about their snooty topics and whatnot. There's a scene in Vigilant where AK does cross this square awkwardly. He's like, I'm this dirty foreigner trying to cross this really grand, beautiful square where there's all these well-dressed people, and he washes his hands in a fountain to channel, and it's like all kind of awkward. And no one notices him because he's just so random. He's super nervous as he's crossing this grand square, but it was a nice little touch, I thought. And otherwise, Lave is, to me, it's like that such a typical medieval capital, is you can play around with it and do whatever you want with it, kind of a thing. So we describe it in several instances in Vigilant, but it's there. I was pictured as cobblestone streets, big wood buildings. Okay, and then there's 3 other cities on the map of Vesh. Rika, which is known for farmlands and blacksmiths, and I threw a bard in it because that was fun. There's a bard from Rika named Paul, who again shows up in Vigilant. There's the town or city of Moor, which I kind of fucked up in Vigilant because I described it as a village, and it's really a city, so my bad. Moor confuses me because in the lore it says that in Moor there was a big battle against the Slytherin from the Morning Marshes. Yet on the map, it's not. We're very close to the Morning Marshes. It's like 100 miles away from the Morning Marshes. So for the Slytherin to have reached it, they would have had to cross a good chunk of southern Vesh. And I'm like, okay, you couldn't have stopped them before they reached Moor? So that's interesting. Moor is also where Amra Verith and her little beau Aronius are from. So major character in Vigilant and major character in Serpent and the Fold, Armor Verith. One of the Vigils. I won't spoil what she's about, but she's important, suffice it to say. And then last city mentioned is Ezel, Ezel, Ezel. They're known for textiles and cloth, so I'm picturing them like, I don't know, cotton farms or maybe silk, probably cotton farms though, given I don't know, maybe that's too further south, but textiles, make textiles in medieval times. Sheep, maybe, wool. Whatever. I don't know enough about that kind of stuff. But there you go. Kind of the main things terrain-wise. And then other big political stuff. Before I get into Vigilance, just want to talk about one other kind of major organization in terms of militantness, but not part of the Veshin military, called the Order of the Morning Sky. They were brought up a lot, and if you're playing a cleric of Madriel or a paladin of Madriel, yes, you can be a paladin of Madriel, and you're certainly in 5th edition, but you couldn't in 3.5. And you're not playing a Swan Knight. Being a cleric of the Order of the Morning Sky is common. So most clerics in Vesh either join the Vigil, or they're low level and they're like, I run a church, or kind of a thing there. But any higher level cleric would either join the Vigil or join the Order of the Morning Sky of Madriel, clerics of Madriel. They were founded in the order was founded in 6 AV and exists to end the suffering of innocence in the name of Madriel. Madriel is neutral good. She's the goddess of the sun. She is like the nicest god in all of Scarn, presumably. Just reading the descriptions of the various divine heavens, if I was going to die on Scarn, that's the heaven I'd want to go to, is Madriel's. It just sounds nice. But this is a militant order of Madrielites, and they believe the ends justify the means. They go out and fight undead, and that's groovy, and most undead are evil. But they also deal with this thing called these infestations called Morgots. They're like almost a virus that infects people and turns them into crazy cannibals. That doesn't turn them into undead. It just kind of makes them go nuts. Basically, effectively zombified, although not undead, and they start attacking. They start eating everything. It's a Gorak plague, basically. And the bites are infectious. They run around. If they get infected, they just start eating everything. And if they run out of like family farm animals or whatever, they'll eat people. They'll eat whatever they can reach. It's meat. They just don't care. And the Madrielites come in, and they'll whenever the village is or a location is infected with Morgots, they basically quarantine it, surround it, make sure no one can leave, and say to the people who aren't infected yet, you have 3 days to clean the infection yourself. And if the people in the town don't clean it themselves, they will go in and destroy everything and everyone. This is, to my mind, really fucked up, because a restoration spell will make it go away. So why can't they just go? They're clerics, for sake. Why can't they just go in and be like, restoration, or ritual of lesser restoration? I don't know, make up something. Man, you follow Madriel. You can't just cure the disease. So I'm like, this is really messed up. Why has no one invented a nicer healing spell? Cure Light's not going to do it, but okay, Lesser Restoration's 5th edition. This was written for 3.5. I don't know what 3.5 spell would cure disease on that kind of scale. Might have needed to be greater restoration, which means you need a higher level cleric and blah 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 blah. But you're paladins too, and cure disease is their thing. Anyway, annoys me that they just go in and kill everybody. It's like, paladins. So Order of the Morning Sky, and they come from Vesh, the good guys. Or how we said Vesh are kind of racists. They're a democracy, and they do have a good general welfare, but they have problems, and the biggest problems, I'd say, would be around the titanspawn races, and because on their borders, they have, to the north are the Orcs, many of whom are in the 5th edition variant redeemed. But because you've got True Drugna, which is like the redeemed Orcs, and the Gravelfist, but you've still got the unredeemed Titan followers, the Scorch Skulls and the Thornhides and the whoever's. That's to the north. To the south, you have the Morning Marshes, where the bulk of the unredeemed Slytherin can be found. The diseased, the Red Witches, various other broods, and they are. And in even old and new lore, they are still raiding southern Vesh and kidnapping people and doing horrible things. And you've got a bunch of other titanspawn in the Morning Marshes as well, that are like pretty horrific. The Mire Dwellers and the various other horrible things, the frog people and the so you've got the northern and southern borders have that. And you've got them pretty close to the Blood Sea, so you've got all the threats from that. You've got the threats from Blood Basin whenever the Hornsworth River goes and reverses and brings in titanspawn from the Blood Sea, or monsters from the Blood Sea. And then you've got close enough to the Blood Steppes, not super close, but close enough that that's still a concern, if it should ever come across the mountains. And Calastia. So Vesh is pretty much surrounded on nearly all sides by bad. Thus, the vigilance guard the borders. But because of this attitude about orcs are bad, Slytherin are bad, they're racist. They're basically like, if you're titanspawn, you're an enemy, and they've placed it that way. So, and then there's this other kind of ingrained racism against the non-divine, and just anything non-divine, and the mistake of like you're weird or whatever, you're a monster. And we talk about that in Vigilant. There's we introduced the Manticora characters, and Iake meets them and assumes they're Titanspawn, but redeemed, because the way he's being introduced to them, they're clearly on our side. So he's like, oh, I've never met, I haven't worked with any redeemed before, and they're like, we're not redeemed. Our race was made by Vangal. What are you talking about? We're more divine than you are. You humans were made by who knows what Titan, but clearly not by a god. We were, so screw you. We're not Titan spawn. What are you crack are you smoking? They didn't have crack, but you know what I mean. So there's that what does this mean? Be redeemed Titan spawn. And I love playing with that. I love the idea that there are these, particularly the Slytherin, because the Slytherin is so beautifully complicated, because they were made either as servitor races for a Titan, or made because they devoured Titan essence, that they got turned into these rat people, and they were kind of ingrained to follow their Titan progenitors, that like they are on the side of the Titans. And it isn't until you could play them in 3.5, but it was like, if you were playing a Slytherin, it was weird, and you were like a minority. And 5e flipped it and said the unredeemed Slytherin are now the minority, the redeemed are the majority, and you find them everywhere. And yet they've maintained the Veshans are racists because of that war with the Slytherin on the border of the Morning Marshes, and because they still have issues with the Orcs. And no, I don't want the good guys. I don't want racism in my games in that sense, because it's not fun. But I do like the overcomingness in my games, because that can be fun. Does that make sense? Maybe it's just the way I run, but I like that element that that's a lot of it is changing hearts and minds within the game setting, and the modern day of like everything about that. I can't help but to bring it into my settings. And I said this, Iake is 100% racist. He hates Slytherin, not any other race. He doesn't have issues with any other race. He's got his best friend's a freaking halfling, or one of his best friends. So he's not a problem, but oh my god, he hates Slytherin. Like with just an irrational at an irrational level. And I liked that about him. Not because that makes him a good person, because it doesn't. It makes him a horrible person. But because a protagonist who has some kind of negative personality trait, I think, is way more interesting than being perfect. So it's an imperfection, but it's also clearly on the page that this personality trait of his is not a good thing. This is a bad thing, and this is why it's a bad thing. So I like that element in it, and maybe it's me being weird as a GM. I don't know. So I'll stop trying to explain myself. The vigils. So should I stop now, Jeremy? Am I going off into the weeds too much? Can't talk about Vesh without talking about the racism in Vesh.
Yeah, especially within the vigils, because it is their job to go out and stop these, Titan spawn. And, a lot of Titan spawn are not playable races. There's like, the Vengarak. Can't play those.
They're monsters.
And Vengarak are like pretty prolific in like that area. And so like going out and fighting these things and protecting the various areas, it makes sense that they're like, very disposed, or they have a predisposition in culturally to be like, this sucks, we need to go keep these Titan spawn out. But unfortunately they get colored. They're like, this thing looks different from me, so it must be a Titan spawn.
And I think that the difference is in terms of sentient, or Vengarak aren't sentient. They're like animals. They have an int of, like, I don't remember, 4 maybe, 2. I don't know, something low. They're animals basically, They're animals with a weird special ability in that they can sense divine followers and go after them. So they're not. It's not like fighting a bargeist or one of the bears or any of those critters. Typical D&D big monster. Because they beeline it to the clerics and they attack the clerics and the paladins first. No other creatures like that, or very few creatures are like that. And that makes them kind of special amongst a monster beast, and that's interesting to me. But and that truly makes them titanspawn in a way that a carrion crawler isn't. It's just a weird monster. This is a weird monster with intent, but they're not sentient. A Slytherin is sentient. They have people stats. That's kind of another.
They have a choice.
Yeah.
They have a choice to, with their cultural and ideological beliefs, they can be like, I am going to make this decision, which a society can determine is good or bad. But Vesh and especially the Vigilants are like, yeah, but you look different, and you were on the other side of the war, or you ate a Titan and you were a rat and now you're a person, and that's not okay, and you invaded Vesh. From the Morning Marshes.
So much of this goes to the experience of this one. I'm going to start talking about the vigils now, and this one specific vigil is the Arsenoth Delta Vigil, and their experiences. I'm going to go through the vigils alphabetically. We have no time for this yet. I'll try to go quick. So Arsenoth Delta is the vigil that's in the Morning Marshes, led by Kinthos Ardante Silverblade. We go first. The middle of this book takes place there in the marshes in Arsenoth. And they also nicknamed the Marsh Vigil. And their job is to defend the line against the Slytherin in the Morning Marshes, and they go out there into the marshes and basically have this skirmish war against primarily the diseased brood of Slytherin. The disease were the Slytherin that got exposed to Churn's yuck in the Morning Marshes. They were one of the broods that was actually born there, and their the unredeemed disease intent is to spread disease, in regards to their Titan, their progenitor, with the idea that only those who can survive disease are worthy. And they literally will kidnap people, infect them, and then let them loose, or kidnap them and experiment them to breed new diseases in them as a living petri dish. So they're worst of the worst in many ways. And when your main exposure to Slytherin is through these lunatics, you're not going to have a good opinion of the species, even though they're such a tiny minority of the species, and they really are. So you see, we go into great detail regarding all of that in the book. And River Rock is their headquarters, which is smack in the middle of the marshes. There wasn't a location of it in any of the maps, so Fran and I made it up. And came up with I think a fun description, where, and it's considered canon now, so I'm happy with that. The idea of calling it being called River Rock, what does that mean? And most words in Scarn are deliberate, and the Scarred Lands are deliberate. Like, they're not generally metaphors of something or random names. It's named because it's descriptive. So I was like, well, then it's got to be a rock and a river, right? And there's these really cool forked rivers that river-wise don't make a lot of sense on the map, because it's like one river splitting into multiple rivers, and usually it's multiple rivers merging into one before it goes out of the ocean. But it's like the opposite, which is weird, because rivers aren't flowing from the ocean to the mountains. Obviously, they're coming from the mountains to the ocean, but they split. And I was like, that's really strange. Why do they do that? So we took and we set the fortress right on this island, or peninsula, where one of the rivers splits, and said that it's this solid rock of granite that the river hit and then flowed around. But instead of just reforming and making it a little island, both paths continue separately. So that, and we put River Rock, literally build a fortress on top of that rock, and it thus protecting it from 3 sides where you have to cross the river to get there, and because of the speed of the river and how it breaks up at that point, it's really hard and tumultuous to get across. So you have to like carefully ferry your way across, or go down further where it's milder and cross to the little area on the peninsula or whatever it is. So it is kind of an island because both of the rivers do make it to the sea, so this is basically an island in the river. So kind of neat there. And I liked that, so we kind of built that, and as a result, most of River Rock Fortress is in the granite because you can move rock spells. You can dig into granite directly with magic. So we just created these like windowless underground chambers that are just incredibly defensible because you'd have to dig underneath the river itself to get in. And while Slytherin are good diggers, that's saying a lot. And also the vigilance could have all sorts of protection things to prevent that sort of thing from happening. So we built this fortress there, and described it pretty extensively with towers and the whole thing with the boats and big huge oaken doors that takes like 2 guys to lift up the bar and open and close. Briefly, it's EK's job to open and close the door because he starts at like the lowest of the low in terms of the vigil. So that's Orcs North Delta. One of their other big names in Orcs North Delta is a scout called Langold Skywarder, who's a lieutenant in Rorns and Ratman. There's a lot of quotes from him, and he's described as a lieutenant. This annoyed me. Okay, I'm gonna go off on a side topic about the Vesh and Vigils for a minute. In Secrets and Societies, there's a breakup of how the Vigils are arranged. There's basically in terms of their ranks and how many people report at each level, in terms of just their overall organization. So at the lowest level, there's squads, which is basically 3 to 6 people, which to me is like a D&D party. About the same size as a D&D party, 3 to 6 D&D party. And they're led by a corporal. And then 2 to 4 squads make a platoon, which is led by a sergeant. And then 4 platoons are brought together into a company, which is led by a captain. And then 3 to 5 companies form a battalion led by a vigilant major. And then battalion multiple, if assuming a vigil is big enough to have more than 1 battalion, or organized in a way that they would have more than 1 battalion, they would be form a full vigil under the command of a vigilant marshal. Like so in Orcs North Delta, the vigilant marshal being the guy I just said, Silverblade. Nowhere in that ranking was the word lieutenant mentioned. I was like, okay, we start corporal, sergeant, captain, blah blah blah. Nowhere was lieutenant. And my personal knowledge of the army is from watching episodes of MASH. Like I know shit about the military. I did a bunch of research, talked to friends who were actually in the military, in the Navy, and in the Army, and like, how does this work? And the Air Force, and for the U.S. And when how does this business? And everybody's like, it's all different, and there's way more ranks than that, and the orders, all like this. And I was like, I don't know, where does lieutenant fall? And lieutenant in MASH was like below, and in Star Trek, I also went with Star Trek, was below captain, but above sergeant. So I was like, okay, but they're not listed in this command chain. So I was like, so I looked into concepts from the business world, corporate world, and when in the corporate world you have a lead and then a manager and then eventually you have a vice president and general manager and all that business. It's kind of similar in terms of the number of people reported at each level. But you have another level where you can be a senior person without being a manager. what does it look like in the military in a vigil, particularly to be a senior person, but not have anybody report to you? So if you were if you specialized in something, so I am a really good scout, for example, for um, Skywarder, or I'm a really good wizard or cleric. I'm not a captain, I'm not a sergeant, but I'm still a specialist and I do funky things and they ask me to come in and do something special. So it's like, that's where lieutenants fall in. They're like these specialists that go and do these things and are called upon as advisors or for casting spells or healing people or whatever, and so they give them the rank of lieutenant. And then I created yet one more rank, which is what is a specialist who hasn't earned lieutenant yet? Because lieutenant would be about equivalent to, say, a sergeant or somewhere between sergeant and captain. What would be a corporal level, or not even corporal yet, or a straight up vigilant level, but who specializes as a cleric, and we'll just call them specialist because that came from the army. So I invented the specialist unranked rank, which is equivalent to vigilant, which is like private, which is like the first rank, and then lieutenant became the other thing. So I made it up, and Fran was like, "Sounds good," and we canonized it in vigilant. So there you go. It's trying to stay as true as we could to the lore and secrets and societies while coming up with this sort of BS thing. Secret Societies also specifies that to be a vigilant, like even at the lowest level, you have to have ranks in the vigilant prestige class. That's like starting at level 7 piece, like player or player character. That's insane. Like, so you can't be the lowest rank until you're level 7? So I was like, no, this makes no sense. Because Eocade, and it all came down to Eocade. Eocade's supposed to be a junior vigilant. And in the original Serpent and Phora, he's level 2. He's a level 2 ranger. And I was like, obviously he can't have prestige class ranks in vigilant if he's level 2. But I want him to be a vigilant, like not a trainee vigilant, but a full vigilant. So how do we compromise? And I ended up throwing out the window completely and say, yes, you are on track to taking ranks in the vigilant prestige class when you get there, and all captains and above need to have it. You have to have the prestige class to be a captain, but you still get the medallion. You're level 2, you get the medallion. You passed, you've completed basic training, you get the medallion. So and that was my reasoning. This is old. Yeah, how do you map realistic concepts with rule set of a tabletop RPG? It's all bullshit, but it's the best. So anyway, I'm gonna talk about so that was Arthur of Delta. It kind of went off to that side thing. I'm gonna go into the Deltanian Vigil. Next, I'm gonna skip and go back to Bijurn, but I'm gonna talk about Deltanians next because they're kind of the next big one, or they are the biggest one. Arsenauts is the most famous. Deltanians are the first Vigil, and they're the trainer Vigil. And again, a lot of this was our additional lore. But they do talk about the fact that they are the trainer in the original lore too. They are the Vigil that report directly to the home commander, and their headquarters is in this place called Bride Lake, also called Vigil Watch Fortress, Vigil Watch Fort. I have no idea where Bride Lake is. we just broke our brains trying to place Bride Lake somewhere in Vesh. So Bride Lake is where vigilants train to become vigilants. Most vigilants, not all of them, but the majority of them who go through basic training go to Bride Lake, go through some number of months of training. This is how you do all of the things. The first 10 chapters of Vigilant is Eocade training at Bride Lake. And how that works. It presumably is by a lake. Blood Basin made no sense. There is no other lake on the map of Vesh, so if Bride Lake is a lake, I would suspect it's very small. Because the smallest lake on the Ghelspad map is Sapphire Lake, I think, which is not in Vesh. I was like, maybe Sapphire Lake. No, it's not Bride Lake. It's technically outside of Vesh, so presumably it's a very small lake. But I have no idea. We didn't specify where Vigil Watch / Bride Lake is. But Vigil Watch Fortress, town of Bride Lake. It's outside of it. Described in a little bit of detail in the first 10 chapters of Vigil. There we go. But Deltanian Vigil, they're the biggest Vigil. 500 members to it. The leader is Daritha Kaloy, who's a female human ranger, vigilant. Chaotic Good too, which I think is cool. And they train, but they also they don't have a specific region. And note that on my map, or on this map, they're not. I don't think they're actually on this map, the Beltanian, because they don't have a specific region in the spot wherever Bride Lake is. Because the home commander, these are the guys who report directly to him, and he will send them anywhere he needs vigilance outside of the general regions where the various vigils hold. So all of the other vigilants have a region. Deltanians are just everywhere else. So most players who play a vigilant character, I'll be like, this is your vigil, you're Beltanian. So that I, as the GM, can have the home commander or Reverith or some who eventually ends up in Beltanian, or some other high level vigilant would be like, and today you're going on a quest for us to Fangsfall to find out what's going on with stuff there. We hear there's something happening that is of concern to Vesh. Go dungeon crawl. And so it just felt to me like any dungeon crawl PC, any typical PC who wants to be a vigilant but doesn't want to have their game restricted to a specific region would probably be in this vigil. And we also established the fact that you can change visuals. There's nothing, I don't see any sin against that, is that you could spend 2 years at Arthurnoth and then run off to, say, Pelpernoy, or switch between them. It seemed like about a year was the right service, and there's some mention in some of the lore that people would go to Arthurnoth for, say, a year, because nobody wants to be in Arthurnoth because it sucks because you're in the middle of a swamp. And so they'd be there like for a year, and then they'd fuck off and not stay. And the people who stayed in Arthurnoth were the badasses. But also because Arthurnoth is so hard that people wouldn't generally join it right out of training, because you pretty much got to be relatively high level or pretty badass to survive it, because it's so difficult working in the marshes. I need to hydrate. Okay. Where was I? Beltanian. So, yeah. So my PCs are always usually in that vigil, and they all have medallions too, which give them, which have a amber medallion, which has something embedded in amber, that gives you certain abilities. Like Arthurnoth, you can use it to walk on water, for example. Ooh. Okay, I feel like I'm gonna have to speed things up. I skipped. He's nodding. I skipped Bajurin Vigil. They're associated with Mithril. And I would imagine them not just in Mithril, but also in the little farmland region right outside of Mithril. My map? It's not my crap map. But like the whole, I think it's called Deneb's Triangle, up there, because they assist the paladins in Mithril with whatever's going on in their area, and are this basically diplomatic unity between Mithril and Vesh through the Bajurin Vigil, and they're mentioned a lot in the Mithril book. They're used a lot too. My Mithril campaigns had military vigils. Skip Dark Motek for the moment. Hornsworth Vigil. They're on the Hornsworth River. Surprise! They're one of the smaller ones. Second oldest vigil. Basically the Beltanian being the oldest. Interestingly, they're not supposed to be the entire Hornsworth River, which is again super long. That would be the entire northern border of Vesh. but they're described as specifically being really close to Arsenoth Delta and backing up Arsenoth. So presumably they're at the mouth of the Hornsworth, and I imagine them being like in and around Lake Repose and Sheer Falls area around that. And they say the battle actually occurred to me. They said the Battle of Two Rivers. That probably means those two rivers, the Hornsworth and the river coming from Lake Repose. Duh, I knew that. Sorry. Yeah. And they've got a fortress and all of that business somewhere in that region. Continuing on, Loharden Vigil, and they are in kind of the northern area, course of Eastern Lead near Bridge City and Ketinas. We talked about this in previous episodes. I don't think they muck about much in the Spine Forest because we talked about not really a lot of people getting into the Spine Forest because of people protecting it. But I imagine they do the borders of the Spine Forest and in that region. But they're always on the move, and they're not very strong. It's only 250 people. I think they're literally the smallest vigil. So how much do 250 people do in that area? But they're there basically to protect that western edge, northwestern edge of Vesh from Orcs and the Horsemen of Angle and whoever else is making trouble. Maritime Vigil. They're basically the Vigil of the Blood Sea. As I joke, they're the ones with boats. In the lore, they're described as the southern region near Blood Rain Woods, kind of near Durover, I would assume, and that kind of area, which surprised me. And they also described as only having a half dozen light warships, so 6 boats of a 300-person vigil. So they're pretty small maritime. I in my own kind of, when I need vigilance to show up in ships, it's always the Maritime Vigil. I imagine that while they have 6 light warships, they probably have a lot of other ships that are just smaller, not warships, but just other kinds of ships, and patrol more the general area, closer to the basin, closer to marshes and the ends of the Hornsworth and overlapping those vigils, because presumably they leave from Lave to go in that area. But they're most known for being in Blood Rain Woods. I have also used them up in the north by Mithril because why not? But that's how you do it. However you want to use the Maritime Vigil, that's how I use it, but that's not technically canon. Now the Vigil whose name I always forget. Metirian. Metirian. Metyria, the Metirian Vigil. West of the Keldar Mountains. West of the Keldar Mountains is all of Ghelspad. So I was like, what? But their headquarters is specifically listed as in the Western Keldar foothills, and there's a fort in the Lower Keldars served as their official headquarters, but now only has 40 vigilants in it. The remainder patrol the region. So they kind of confused me a little bit. Where they're exactly located, I kind of assume that they're kind of north of Burrock-Torn, up to the Canyon of Souls, and the person who made this map agreed with me. I did not make this map that we're showing right now. That's where they put Metirian. I found this on the internet. I'm like, it's good enough for me. I'm not quite sure where this is supposed to, because the other places west of the Keldar Mountains would be the Bleak Savannah or the Ganges. There's another whole vigilant in the Ganges, so that doesn't make sense. And they're not in the Haggard Hills because it's Pelpernoi. And I think that Adern of the famous Battle of Adern's Tear probably was in this vigil, maybe? I don't know. I know vigilants are associated with him, so that makes sense to me, but this one is fuzzy and confusing. moving on. Molestown. I'm going alphabetical, in case you didn't guess. Molestown Vigil in Molestown, but they're known for having their headquarters in Molestown. Molestown is a city-state that is technically not part of Vesh. They're right on the other side of the Hornsworth, off the border. We did talk about them in a previous episode. They're really known for trading up the Cordrata corridor to Mithril, and as well as trading down the Hornsworth to the Blood Sea, as just this massive trade center, independent from Vesh and Mithril. But there is a vigil that's associated with them, 300 strong, and they guard the caravans that go up the corridor, and specifically within the mountain region of the Serpentine Pass and the Monscar Mountains, because there's lots of horrible beasties there that they protect. So that they have various forts, towers, and whatnot throughout the mountains along that trade route, and that's where you'd find Molestown Vigil. I had one of the people that EK trained with, who was a carter, join the Molestown Vigil at the end of her training. Pelpernoi. This is where the spoilers come in. Pelpernoi is in the Haggard Hills. This is the second vigil that Eocade is in, which is how we tie him into the Serpent Amphora plot. Because it's the Pelpernoi vigil that finds the Amphora and gets into all that madness in that module, eventually ending up in Trela, and go read the book. So Pelpernoi guard the Haggard Hills. We talked about the Haggard Hills last episode? Is that last episode? The lifeless region. Pelpernoi Vigil is, again, not that big. It's only 300 vigilants. And they probably have the largest region of any vigil, realistically. Because the Haggard Hills, while not very big, is very long. And they pretty much protect and scout through all the way to the Stricken Forest, through the Hornsaw and the Haggard Hills. I split them up, and I think the book actually splits them up this way too, or the lore, into 3 companies, even though there's only 300 strong, so it's a 100-person company each, for each of those 3 regions. So one bordering the Blood Steppes, one bordering the Hornsaw, and one bordering the Stricken. And I don't think it's 100 each exactly, because probably the vigil bordering the Stricken is not going to be as big as, say, the one on the Blood Steppes. But that's specific numbers. Led by Talisa Palpern, who's a descendant of the original leader, Hatteras Palpern, who led his troops against a bunch of Jinn back in the day, and they basically guard the region there. I also overlapped them into work in it. I think it does specify this, that they work in with the Druids of Hope and the Healing Circle as well from the Ganges. And kind of overlap a little bit with the Ganges Vigil. They specify that they don't have an official headquarters, so we specified that in Vigilant. We came up with where do they winter? And the Haggard Hills, being an area of this great devastation, has all these ruins throughout the region of, where there used to be people, but during the whole killed everything living incident, there's just these abandoned towns. Used to be these little halfling various places and other people. And so the idea that we came up with was that every year Talisa picks one of these abandoned towns and fixes it up, so that once things get a little bit more habitant, people can move in, or makes it, it builds a tower there maybe, and makes it like a stopping point, and kind of fixes things up. So there's this point where Eocade and his squad are actually fixing a windmill in the middle of this like ancient town, and digging out through ruins and finding like skeletons of dead halflings, and it's really sad. Of like this, because nobody's been here since the devastation, and she just sort of, this is the town we're doing this winter, because they can't really scout during the winter time because of the snow and everything. So I kind of had a little bit of fun with that. Of course, stuff happens. And then finally, did I miss anything about Pelpernoi? I love Pelpernoi, obviously. I got to play a lot of it. They're also big in, they have a lot of spellcasters, more heavy spellcasters than any of the other vigils. Thus why I introduced, like, Eacade's platoon of 12 has like 4 casters, which is kind of ridiculous. And it's because there's all this kind of untamed magic in that region that causes all sorts of problems. So they're like, oh, there's random weird pools of magic, and one of the things we threw in there was a spontaneous golem to be like, here's a weird thing of magic, and let's go deal with that. And we had a wizard here going, ooh, what's this thing? Oh, look into it. Okay. Anything else about Palpatine? And then finally, Semanye. But not quite finally, but Semanye is in Durover. It's just interesting. They're the ones they're the probably spies, Mitchell. Because they, while they're 250 vigilance assigned to help Durover, which is the country that Vesh is supporting, that's at war with the Calastian hegemony, there are rumors that many Semanya members are embedded in Calastia as, spies who are like, people don't know their vigilance, whatnot. And clandestine operations against the Calastians. So great opportunity as a PC if you're doing a campaign in the hegemony to have a vigilant who's part of the Semanya Vigil. Like, maybe our dad in the family affair could have been in the Semanya Vigil. I wondered. In the game that Jeremy heard. And finally, there's the 12th Vigil, which is no more, called Dark Motak. They were disbanded because some shit happened with them. And they were basically around during the Divine War, once responsible for security in Eastern Vesh. When Traitor happened, they disbanded them. Do I have time to read this? Can I sneak this? It's like 2 pages.
Sure.
Okay. This is like a quote from Vigilant, because I think this is a nicer description of what happened to Dark Motak in a narrative sense, rather than the dry text in Secrets and Societies. Eacade has joined Arsenoth Delta, and is in Arsenoth, and he's just come in from doing literally shit work, and he's all grimy, and comes in to have dinner with his group of vigilants he's been working with, and spoon tapped Eacade's chest. Eacade looked up at a one-eyed woman who gestured to his medallion. Best watch that ditch scum from your amulet. Wouldn't want to be called a traitor. Eacade paled. He grabbed a scrap of cloth from the workbench, dipped it in his water cup, and scrubbed the dirt off of his medallion. Traitor for having a dirty medallion? Sorry, he muttered. I didn't know. Chuckles rippled around the table. Eacade froze, then glanced around the room at the amused faces. You don't know Traitor's story, Lenar? Asked Balak. Balak's the sergeant. He's a leader. The sentence construction caught Eacade's ear. Traitor. The Veshian word that Eacade had taken to mean conspirator or defector wasn't just a description, but also a name. Eacade shook his head. Balak drew a long draw from his cup and set himself to his true craft. There's 11 vigils today, but there used to be 12. Dark Motak was one of the first vigils formed. They defended the eastern Veshian border that is now under the care of the Deltanians. Stretches the Deltanians a bit too thin, if you ask me, although explains why they're so big. Only the marshes really need a vigil that large. The other vigilants knocked their cups on the table and shouted Delta, as in Arsenoth Delta. Balak cheered along with them and then waited for them to calm down. Well, this demon lord, Mortaxis, a nasty churn-spawn fuck, had an army in the Keldar Mountains raiding western Vesh. This was toward the end of the Divine War. The High Elves had already gutted Churn and Termana, but this pestilent bastard just wouldn't give up. His magic made the dead walk again, so our troops were fighting their own fallen comrades. Veshian High Command called the vigils from across the land, Dark Motak included. They were stealthy, mostly stalkers. Defined the specialty, no doubt. They were led by Jovian Traitor, the stealthiest motherfucker of them all. Traitor was ordered to take this vigil deep into enemy territory and find their weak points. but the Vigil fell into an ambush that drove them into the Keldar steppes. They retreated into a cave in a deep canyon with no way out, surrounded by titanspawn and undead. Jovian Traitor went alone to parley with the titanspawn commander. When he returned, he told his troops that no quarter would be given and that they would fight to the last. His soldiers shook in their boots. So Traitor made up a potion to give them. Said it would make them strong and brave. Each Vigilant drank, but instead of stirring him up, it paralyzed him. Traitor slit the throat of each and every person under his command. The titanspawn stood over them and watched him do it. He traded his life for the lives of his Vigil. Only one to survive to tell the tale was a fella named Lorendale. He didn't drink the poison, guess he was brave enough without it, and the enemy let him go. They sent him to tell the Veshian command what happened to demoralize the Veshian army. Poor bastard put down his swords forever after that and became a bard. Traitor went on to become a general in Mortaxis' army, leading the titanspawn in several victories. They'd likely have conquered Vesh if it wasn't for Belsameth. Belsameth? Yukade asked. Yep. They say that one full moon night she appeared and slaughtered Mortaxis himself. Guess she didn't like some uppity demon lord siding with the Titans. With him dead, his army of corpses crumbled to dust and the titanspawn ran back to the mountains. And Jovian Traitor was never seen again. So, asked Yukade, what does this story have to do with dirty medallions? Well, said Balak, leaning in conspiratorially, you see, when a Vigilant breaks his oaths, his medallion turns black as sin and marks him as a traitor, so it never happens again. But I thought they never found Traitor, piped a halfling who'd cared for the fort's chickens. How did they know his medallion turned black? Balak rapped the halfling on the head. It's a story, you idiot. That's how stories work. Yukade made a note to clean his medallion as regularly as he did his weapons and armor. So, it's my little retelling of Dark Motak and what happened there. I love it.
Yeah. So I do find it interesting because there's this, for two reasons. One, I really, really personally, as a designer, despise when people take like Latin words, because there isn't Latin in whatever place, you know, it's not Earth.
Yeah.
But they went out of their way to be like, the word traitor was somebody's name, and it became this like common term to mean what we would know as traitor in Veshian because of this person. But beyond that, so the Vigils are listed in multiple books, and it talks about this betrayal in multiple books, but only in the Player's Guide to Rangers and Rogues do you find out that Jovian Traitor, who's the guy who went and did this, did it intentionally. And the guy who survived, I can't think of his name, Lormdale?
The bard, yeah. Lormdale.
Yeah, was in on it. And like they sacrificed their vigil, their entire vigil, because they were trying to get in to the demon's army to sabotage it. And
yeah, that's what's implied.
And so
it's
such this like,
but not common knowledge. Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's not common knowledge, and so everyone despises this guy, and it's quite likely that Belsameth through Jovian is how the demon was taken out. But it's like it's such a great story.
It is such a great story, yeah. And that's again how they know about the amulet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And I don't want to say why, but this story was really important to have.
Yeah,
nice. In Vigil. There's a reason why it's there. So, and a further reason why Yukade freaks out a lot. Poor schlub. Did skip over the Vigil. They have Vigil vows. They've got these oaths that they make. And we've got a scene in around chapter 10 where Yukade gets to take the Vigil oaths. And then there's 7 oaths, which is really not 7. I don't know why, because the 7th oath is obey the oaths. I'll just read this real quick. 1, obey the people of Vesh and their chosen leaders in all things. 2, obey lawful commands as you would the people of Vesh. 3, honor the goddesses Tanel and Madriel, and aid Corian the Avenger and his followers whenever possible. Honor and respect the followers of Deneb, the Earth Mother, save when their actions prevent execution of your lawful duties. 4, defend the weak and avoid taking innocent life. 5, oppose the titanspawn and the armies of Vesh in every way possible. 6, you are vigilant for life. And 7th, obey these oaths, for they are the heart and soul of the vigil. And yeah, I love you're vigilant for life, which, you know, it's really important for poor Eocade, who goes through some shit, which may kind of tear him away from the Veshian Vigil in future books. And yet he's a vigilant for life, so there you go. What does that mean? So those are kind of the core, and we made a big deal in the book that, like, you will remember these oaths and take them to your grave, and when you've forgotten everything else, you will still remember this. It was like the way that they're taught and the way that they're ingrained. And then each vigil, each specific of the 11 vigils has their kind of standing orders, are lesser oaths that are kind of like useful advice along the things like always have multiple people on watch every night, you know, walk in single files to hide your numbers. Kind of shit. Is that actually one? I look. Avoid travel. Always travel single file. That actually is one. I thought I made that up. No, it is one. I can't remember what I've read and what is just in there. You know. So yeah. So and some that are important and relevant to Eocade, like some pieces of intelligence are more valuable than your own life, but don't give your life away needlessly, Lennar. And my probably favorite, lies are the poison in the bloodstream of the vigil. Don't lie, Eocade. It's bad. So, anyway, played around with this and tried to pull as many of these little snippets of lore as we could as we wrote the book. So yes, this episode is as much about my novel as it is about enjoyed it. And there's tons more, but we're kind of out of time. So, did I miss anything super duper important?
No, I think that pretty much covers the visuals and Vesh as a country. Next time, we'll talk about something. We haven't decided that yet. But for now, Sarah, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sarah Stewart. You can find me on Drive-Thru RPG and Drive-Thru Fiction. Obviously, I wrote the book that I've been babbling about for the last 2 hours, as well as a whole bunch of RPG titles up on Drive-Thru, including Frostlands of Fenric, Vigil training missions, Maritime Patrol, and the Valgos from Travis Legg, and a bunch of other smaller pieces, including the calendar of the Scarred Lands, which I also mentioned. So I am a Scarred Lands lore nut person, and you can find everything and all the links on my website at morelikethisindustries.com.
Awesome. And I am Jeremy Hochhalter. You can find me on Twitter at WHPubs, here on Twitch at WH Publications, same over on Facebook, WH Publications. I also publish on Drive-Thru RPG and DM's Guild. Join me on Wednesdays for Chaz Calendar's Final Fantasy XIV inspired D&D campaign, currently playing at, trying to remember, 3:30? No, it's 2:30 Eastern on my channel. And then later that day, for the next several weeks, he is running over on the Onyx Paths channel, Scion Become as Gods, which has been a crazy game. If you haven't checked out Scion, it is also fun. Great setting, great system. What else did you already say?
You can find both of us on Mondays.
Yeah, that was the next thing.
Channel. I think is in A Family Affair. We're playing the Scarred Lands game, and I think that's also in the Onyx Path Twitch channel as well.
I think they do host it over there. I also host it here on this channel, so if you can't find it, just stop by here, and that is at
And that is glorious fun.
What time is that?
It makes my Mondays every week. It's just so ridiculously awesome.
I think it's at 3 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, there he
he's
is.
good.
Yep, 3 p.m. Eastern. Awesome. Well, until next time, if you're watching live, check out the virtual horror con this weekend that Onyx Path is taking part in, and so are a bunch of people. If you aren't watching this live, well, you might have missed out or you might have been there. But
Maybe.
yeah, we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.